Hello and a warm welcome to my newest patrons, Jeremy and Dora. Thank you so much for signing up to my Patreon to support the show and gain access to exclusive and ad-free content. I appreciate you both and I hope that you find the episodes helpful. You're both awesome. Also, thank you to the two recent reviews that I have received from Wizardry and Jay. It is really helpful to receive feedback and reviews for the show. If you would like to support the show, you can find me at patreon.com/thecultvault or follow the links in the episode description. Likewise, you can also support the show by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your shows, unless it's Spotify. In that case, a rating on that platform is equally helpful. Thank you to anyone who takes a few minutes to complete these tasks. Now, on to the show. Hello listeners, I'm your speaker Casey, and today we take a look into something new. Conventionally, the Bible has 66 books. Each book has a different name. One of these books is titled Mark. The book of Mark has a particularly interesting piece of scripture in the 5th verse, line 34. Mark 5:34 reads, "He said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering.'" At least in the New International Version. In the New Living Translation, it reads, "And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over.'" And the Standard English Version says, "And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.'" The King James Bible Version says, "And he said unto her, 'Daughter, thy faith hath made thee whole. Go in peace and be whole of thy plague.'" And the New King James Version reads, "And he said to her, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction.'" There are thousands of translations, versions, edits, updates of the Bible, originally thought to be written at different times between 1200 and 165 BC, and widely available today in 724 languages. Of course, there are going to be various versions, but with every version of Scripture comes undetermined amounts of interpretation. Sometimes individuals take preferred versions of this holy text and decree an absolute and ultimate interpretation of the Bible. This interpretation determines the well-being, livelihood, and overall existence of those who are taught this unmoving dogma in destructive religious groups. Mary Baker Eddy created such a thing after she extensively studied the Bible and the healings carried out by Jesus throughout it. This inspired Eddy to create a movement focused on the mental aspects of sickness, influencing others to adopt her one true way of interpreting the Bible, and therefore one true way of existing, and it would cost followers greatly. Lauren Hunter is a writer, published author, and coach. She is also a former Christian Scientist. Working with other former members, Lauren has published the emotional and illuminating book, Leaving Christian Science, 10 Stories of New Faith in Jesus Christ. And she is here today to tell us all about it. In part 1, we will discuss Christian Science and Lauren's involvement in the movement, before moving on to part 2 with a discussion about Lauren's writing, her recent publication, and life after Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science. For early access to full-length episodes that are ad-free, you can sign up at patreon.com/thecultvault to support the show from as little as £1 a month. Thank you so much to each of my 39 patrons as we head into 2023. Some of you have been here from the start, and some of you are just finding me now, and I appreciate you all so much. Now, here is Lauren. So hello, Lauren, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and chat on the podcast with me today and to be the first person to talk on the show about Christian Science. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Sure thing, Casey. Thank you so much for having me on the show. This is exciting. And I didn't realize it was the first Christian Scientist or former Christian Scientist that you've had. So that is great. Um, I was a fourth generation Christian Scientist, so like 4 generations back in my family on both sides. like my father's side and my mother's side. A little background about myself. I live in California. I've been a writer and a PR and communication consultant and a blogger for a lot of years. And I left Christian Science about 20 years ago. And my book came out right during COVID 2020, September 2020. We just celebrated the second anniversary. My book is called Leaving Christian Science, 10 Stories of New Faith in Jesus Christ. So thank you for having me. I'm also like a wife and a mom. I have 4 kids. They are getting older. Most of them are taller than me now. So 13, 15, 17, and one in college, 19.
Oh
So
my goodness. So there is
yeah,
plenty going on to keep you busy.
plenty. Yes, yes.
And this being the first real deep dive into Christian Science, I'm really, really looking forward to getting into this topic and learning a bit more. The only basic knowledge that I have is through Patreon deep dives that I've done about other cult groups that seem to be tied up with Christian Science in some way. So Mayotus Blackburn, I'm not sure if she's a figure from history that you're familiar with.
No,
She
I'll have
led
to look her up.
this group called the Blackburn Cult,
Mm.
but formerly known as the Royal Arms of the Great 11,
Ooh,
the divine order of the Royal Arms of the Great 11. And she based a lot of her teachings on Egyptology, New Age thinking, but also on the teachings of Christian Science. And
wow.
the founder of Christian Science happened to be a pretty prevalent person at that time. So there was a lot
Oh,
of thank you. There was a lot of to and fro between the two women at that time, because Mayotis Blackburn was like, maybe we can come together. And the other lady, who I'm sure you can tell us
Mary
so,
Baker Eddy. Uh-huh.
she was like, no, thank you, because she had her own thing going on and was building herself a nice little empire.
You know what you have right there is a little pinpoint of uh, cult leaders tend to be narcissists, like clinical narcissists. And so 2 narcissists together, like that just doesn't happen so much. For those of you who are listening, you're like, yeah, I totally get it.
I think so much of this came from Mayotis Blackburn having a lot of people in her fold who were Christian scientists.
Hmm.
And when they were reluctant to give up their teachings for reasons I'm sure we will go into today, she wanted to pair up with Baker so that she could undermine her work. I think is
Yeah.
what I could tell. But this was in the 1920s, so I was really kind of having to dive
Wow.
into archives to find out, credible
Well, yeah, I
information about
mean,
her.
Mary Baker Eddy lived 1821 to 1910. So, I mean, I know there, I have another friend who is also a former, and he has done a ton of research on Mary Baker Eddy, and he speaks. And there's, if you go to YouTube and you search, let's see, what can you search there? His first name is Tanner. You could search Tanner Mary Baker Eddy, and it's EDDY. You'll probably pull up. We have a few different, the ministry that I'm a part of, Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists. We have like an outreach to people that's non-religious, and we also we do webinars. And so we have kind of a track that's for people who like don't want any more kind of Christian flavor to everything. And then we have a lot of things that are pointed to those who are open to like biblical Christianity, not with all the extraneous stuff that was added by Christian Science. So we kind of have those. So there are some really helpful webinars on YouTube. And you can either search Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists, or you could put in Mary Baker Eddy and the first name Tanner, and I think it'll pull up some of his talks on all of that. I am not a church historian. So one thing I usually start out with is to kind of explain Christian Science is not what it is not, because that's helpful. It's not Scientology. So if you shop at the grocery and you see those magazines and they have Tom Cruise and Scientology, doesn't have anything to do with Scientology. It is not really Christian, and it's not really scientific. So that also makes it confusing. And it's also not a group of like scientists who are Christians. Sometimes it gets confused there. so so you might ask, well, what is it then? If it's not any of these things you're saying. And that is a good question. Christian Science was uh, concocted by Mary Baker Eddy, who claimed that she fell, she prayed, she had healing, and that God revealed some special information to her. She then, without any biblical training, she didn't go to seminary. She was raised in the Congregationalist denomination in Massachusetts in the 1800s. And, you know, during this time, in the 19th century American culture, there was a movement of pragmatism. Darwin's theory of evolution was gaining popularity. People were questioning dogma or anything miraculous. And Christian Science offered a scientific approach. Scientific is in air quotes, you know, scientific approach to faith and healing in a time when the world was moving forward in the field of science, discovering invisible energies like electricity. So people were really fascinated by these other forms of thought with Eastern and transcendental philosophy, and all of that taught that divine nature. They taught something different than what most of us believed, or most people at the time believed, about the divine nature of the world and the material world. So in looking at Steve Hassan's bike control, as I was looking through this, you know, the first one, B, stands for behavioral control. And I know a lot of cultic groups, or, you know, there's destructive groups, whatever word you'd like to use to talk about these groups. There's a lot of like manipulation of behaviors in a lot of these groups. Christian Science is sort of different in that the pretty much the only behavioral control is the first one, regulation of individual physical reality. And so that's tough for people to like wrap their minds around, because when you say like, oh, I grew up in a religious cult, which most of us don't like go around just like popping that into like, you know, convos over a glass of wine at a dinner party with people you don't know. Like typically that's not where you start, because that word is pretty it comes at you kind of hurtfully, and most people don't like that. That's where like destructive group feels a little easier to digest.
That was such a great introduction to Christian Science itself as a movement. And also, I was going to mention, isn't Tanner one of the authors that's featured in your book?
Yes.
He's the one
Yes.
that is kind of compiling this extensive
Yes.
timeline
And I forgot that. So thank you. Yes, you can throw that in there, that his chapter and his name, you know, his full name, and he's very transparent and open to being contacted, and he's given a lot of interviews himself. His chapter is chapter 87. And so in my book, I'll just give you the premise for how it's set up. There's 10 chapters, and the subtitle is 10 Stories of New Faith in Jesus Christ. So we didn't all know each other before this project. A lot of us knew each other through this ministry that we worked together on, Fellowship of Former Christian Scientists. However, each of us kind of had our own experience of like deconstructing or asking questions, and like falling out or tumbling out or kicking and then screaming, getting out. You know, it looks different for each person. So the book in here, the story is set up, each of them, around a topic. And the topic or theme has to do with theology in Christian Science. So the idea is kind of breaking people from the Christian Science theological ramifications of the topic. Like the first one is matter. And matter is a big deal in Christian Science, because the bulk of the teachings in Christian Science are that number one in behavioral bite control, regulating physical reality. And the physical reality that we were taught was that the physical reality isn't reality, and that the material world isn't the only reality, that our senses are basically lying to us, and that the spiritual reality is the true reality. Now, this might sound or sniff faintly like Gnostic theology. I know some of the groups you probably interviewed have flavors of this, where it's sprinkled in this, the Gnostics, it was a heresy, an ancient heresy that sprung up shortly after, like in the first 100 years after Jesus Christ lived and died. Heresies were springing up even then. So that whole, King Solomon said back in Proverbs, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, hate to tell you, a lot of these groups, right? They're just taking something and repackaging it into something new, and it's not really anything new. So Mary Baker Eddy did a good job. She packaged up ancient Gnostic heresy into a newfangled, like Christian-like religion. So Christian Science churches look pretty much like the white steepled congregational churches that she grew up in, pews with an aisle down the middle, and the hymn, the little racks with the numbers, the 3 different hymns you would sing. The service was set up very similarly. We had Sunday morning services and Wednesday night testimony meetings. Those are the 2 meetings. And on Sunday mornings, the kids either had a nursery class or Sunday school from like age 5 up through 20. We got to go to Sunday school, which was great because church was boring. And she set up her churches with no pastor. So first she was a pastor, but then she took herself out and decided that really it's a good Cult 101 move to like put regulations in place that could never be changed. And so the manual of the mother church that she set up in the 1800s, still to this day, is unchanged. Not even like a constitution where you can pass amendments and add on and make changes. Even the Mormon church has the ability, they have modern day prophets who can make changes to things. So Christian Science, you can't change anything. And the churches are still very much the same format. The service is the same format. Just to give you like lay of the land, the Bible is secondary to Mary Baker Eddy's textbook, which is called Science and Health, with Key to the Scriptures. So she, through her fall and her subsequent healing that she experienced, she started putting together this scientific evidence for a way to this is her word, scientifically heal yourself from an ailment, whether that was of skin, knee, or cancer, or anything in between. Except, little asterisk, she did make a provision for people to have a bone set if you broke a bone. And there's also a provision to go to the optometrist to have glasses. And there's also a little provision to go to the dentist. So you'll find that Christian Scientists believe that matter is unreal, yet, and they will pray for cancer. They won't go in and get things looked at. Some will, but the majority will not. And there's several memoirs about people suffering and dying of cancer, untreated cancer. But you can get your teeth cleaned, and you can get braces, and you can get eyeglasses, but you can't take vitamins or medicine.
And even though Christian Science is not linked to Scientology, there's some tangents there that feel kind of reminiscent of that group.
Interesting.
It is
Yes.
interesting. I think it is, especially because actually both groups don't really let you use modern science, which the names would suggest, which again is another really interesting thing. And you mentioned that you're 4th generation. So do you have any idea of where your family's initial entrance into this group came to be?
So there's me. I have to write it down. There's my mom, there's her mom, so that's my grandmother. She just died a few years ago. And then my great grandmother. So my great grandmother, who I didn't know, she studied with someone who was trained by Mary Baker Eddy herself.
So you're talking really towards the real
beginnings, yes. And
wow.
At the turn of the century, the year 1900, Christian Science was the fastest growing religion in America. So there are, churches are closing every month. There are churches closing because it is a declining religion worldwide. But at that time, there's still, you will drive past churches in every other town, every big town. You might have noticed a Christian Science reading room, like either at the airport or in a little, strip mall. People often go, "What's that?" And it's curious. And so that's the Christian Science reading room. It is pretty much the only way that Christian Scientists like evangelize, but it's very laced up. So it's a bookstore that only sells Christian Science stuff, and they have some comfy chairs, and they have a person there who volunteers, and you can go in and like you could talk to them and ask them spiritual questions. Or so it's a very like laid back kind of evangelistic strategy. They also have publications. You probably have heard of the Christian Science Monitor, which for a long time was a very well respected physical print daily newspaper, not as big as like the New York Times, but a little bit smaller, like half fold. um, and it since has gone totally digital, and shrunk. Now I think that it's online, and maybe there's a monthly edition, a print edition. There's also the Christian Science Journal, and the Christian Science Sentinel. These are magazines for Christian Scientists, and you're sort of expected to subscribe to those things. There's also Christian Science. There is one Christian Science University, and there's also a boarding school, and these are located in St. Louis, Missouri, near St. Louis, I should say. The Principia College is in Elsa, Illinois, which is just across the bluff, across the river from St. Louis. And there's an upper school in St. Louis that's a boarding school for high school and grade school, that's like K through 8, that's not boarding. But those are all in St. Louis. And there are various summer camps. There's like 3 or 4 different away summer camps, one in Missouri and several on the East Coast, and one in Colorado. So that's how like Christian Scientists connect with one another. Also, the home base, we call it the Mother Church, is in Boston, and there's a campus there with the big Mother Church where Mary Baker there was a small church initially, and then a building fund, and then they kind of tacked on this big giant church. And there's grounds and offices, and the publications offices are all there. So that is, it's not exactly like a Mecca where you're expected to go visit, but if you can, it's nice to be able to go visit and see things. And there's a museum, and you can wander in the church or go to a service there. And it's very different because most Christian Science churches that I grew up in anyway were very small. So it might be a big church, but there might only be 10 or 20 people there, or it might be a small church with just a few people. And so the experience of going to the Mother Church, which I had when I was maybe 17 or 18, there was a youth conference there. And so it was a whole big, huge church. I don't know how many it seats, maybe 700 or 800 people, was full. And so to experience, like, often you are the only one at your school or the only one in your social circle that is a Christian Scientist. And so to go away and have that experience of like being with a whole bunch of other people that are Christian Scientists, same thing with summer camp, you're doing activities and getting to know those people, like other groups where you like would try to go to the college that is affiliated with your church. That's a thing, whether it's a destructive group or a non-destructive group. So it looks very kind of normal-ish from the outside looking in. It's when you delve deeper into the theological principles of what Christian Science teaches and really indoctrinates, that's where like the information control piece would come in.
After finishing your book, Leaving Christian Science, I had this thought that perhaps after growing up, being born into and growing up in this movement, you would not particularly agree with. But it felt to me as if Mary Baker Eddy had found something that would give her standing, and would feed that narcissism that we've spoken about, and feed her financially, and perhaps she didn't see that the legacy would carry on to 4 generations time, where people would still be regimentedly sticking to her teaching and her doctrines. I felt like she just wanted to create something in her lifetime that would benefit her solely. I don't know if you feel that that's an accurate take on the situation at all.
It's interesting, actually, because so this is something I was told probably by my family. And so I would have to like lean on an expert to pinpoint where this was in the actual history. But I was told that she thought initially that her findings would be widely accepted by every Christian church, and that every Christian church would just be adopting this additional theological essence that is, like she blew the lid off. Oh, matter isn't real. Really, we're all spiritual. So if we just align our minds with this spiritual principle of who God is and who He created us to be, that we would have this freedom from all of these physical ailments. There's more emphasis on like healing disease and your physical body than like healing war or healing poverty or healing famine, whereas some like do-gooders would focus more on those types of things. It's really the majority of all the work that you do. It's very individualistic. It's very puritanistic in terms of like hard work that you are doing in your own mind. It's grouped in the cults. You have some study of different types of cults. It's grouped in what's called the mind sciences. And there's actually a few other groups that have kind of spawned out of Christian Science. But it's more mental control than anything. There's not a whole lot of physical controls. There wasn't a certain way to dress. There wasn't a certain way to act, or certain, no makeup or only skirts or head coverings, none of that. Christian Scientists look like everybody else. Often they tend to be upper middle class, Caucasian type people who, because honestly, her language in the book is like very Victorian, flowery, complicated, hard to understand gobbledygook. We call it like a mental twisting of words and redefining of terms, which is pretty common in cults. But it's kind of a lot to handle. Like if you didn't have a college education or super smart parents who were reading to you since you were two, it probably would not appeal to you today, certainly. But even 100 years ago, it's a lot. It's not just like the normal message of salvation that you would hear preached through the Bible. It's like a lot of additional complicated sounding language, if that makes sense. And I can read something later if you want me to demonstrate that.
It does make sense. And the things you mentioned about the turn of the century and mentioning how things were really changing in the world in terms of developing progression, there were a lot of predictions that people made, even all the way back to like,
Yes.
when you think about, Socrates and philosophers and significant people that are cited even today made predictions about things that at the turn of the century were being proven to be true. So for Mary Baker Eddy to kind of jump on that and say, I can't give you definitive proof, but it exists and it includes Christianity as well. Her ideas of Christianity and the theology that she developed anyway, and her interpretations of things, it's easy to see why some people at that time would have been like, oh my goodness, of course this makes sense. Things in science are being proven. So why isn't everything this woman's saying true as well?
Yeah.
When she is at least living proof of what she is selling to everybody.
So you asked like the $1 million question that many of us have asked, is like, what were her original intentions? So she expected that it would get gobbled up by all the Christian churches and that her ideas would just be melded in with Christianity, when that didn't happen, probably because she ran up against naysayers or people who actually were paying attention, were like, what are you teaching? Because she pretty much throws out the Holy Spirit. She pretty much throws out the deity of Jesus Christ himself. Like the essential ingredients of Christianity are, the words are there, but they mean totally different things. So you have to really not being paying attention to miss those things. So I apologize that I don't have specific names of people who were her haters, but I mean, Mark Twain did write a whole book kind of making fun of her. So, it was in the news. The timing was right. It was a ripe audience for for the taking at that time. Medical science still was not super advanced. And I don't know, like, her intentions, those who have trouble letting go of their alliance or allegiance to Mary Baker kind of fall on the side of, that she didn't mean well, that she thought she had a truth. She was fired up about that. But as you look again and again at cultic leaders who form their own religions, there is a very distinct pattern of narcissistic personality disorder in these leaders who know, I mean, whether they know what they're doing or not, they know what they're doing, but they're pulling the wool over people's eyes on purpose, because there is gain. She did make a lot of money. She was a celebrity. She's often listed in like the top 10 lists of female, entrepreneurs of the last 200 years who like did something great. And you're like, forming a cult, really? Should you be on the list? Like, yeah, it's complicated. And I don't know that, I don't know if the answer is necessary. Each person kind of has to make their own peace with that.
I think that that's a fantastic answer as well. It's kind of just me throwing kind of what I took from her teachings, and basically a conclusion I think that I just drew as somebody that didn't grow up in the group, which of course is going to be completely different to somebody
Yeah.
who did, whose entire life, at least for a portion, was based on the teachings of this woman, which leads us nicely into me kind of zipping quiet and handing over the reins to you to just ask you if you can give us details on the beliefs and practices and
Mhm.
what life was like for you growing up in Christian Science.
Yeah. So beliefs and practices. So I thought this is super short. I'm going to read you kind of the essence. It's called the scientific statement of being. And this is what most of the theology is based on, this one statement. We repeat this at every service, and it's memorized by everyone. There is no life, truth, intelligence, nor substance in matter. All is infinite mind and its infinite manifestation. There you have the big word number one, manifestation, right? For God is all in all. Spirit is immortal truth. Matter is mortal error. Spirit is real and eternal. Matter is unreal and temporal. Spirit is God and man is his image and likeness. Therefore, man is not material. He is spiritual. This comes from Science and Health, page 468. So the practices and beliefs come around those statements that we were trying to align our minds with, the fact that our senses are telling us information, but we are taught that they aren't real. Our material senses are not real. In essence, like, the religion pretty much gaslights your actual physical senses. So that could be akin to another group, how they may groom someone for sexual activity within the group, and tell them certain specific things, that it's okay, and that it's not wrong, or whatever they tell you. So in Christian Science, it's that, well, your body isn't real. Your eyes are lying to you, your touch, and so even from an early age, you fall, you skin your knee, your parents are declaring these things over you, that you're a perfect child of God. That is a phrase that's used over and over again. So there, in essence, there's no sin. So in regular old biblical Christianity, sin is like the whole reason why we need God to begin with, that without the problem of sin, we don't really need a savior. So in Christian Science, sin is also in the statement I just read, that sin is not real. It's kind of thrown out the baby with the bathwater, both the sin and the material senses. However, as a child growing up, you have a physical body. You maybe have an illness, or I've known people who've been diabetic, as a child, and nearly died because their parents were praying instead of taking them to the hospital. And there definitely are children who have died from neglect of medical care. And there's a nonprofit group called Child, that has the acronym Child, that was founded in the States in the 80s, by a woman, Rita Swan, who lost their child and was tried and convicted, I believe. So I didn't have any like gigantic medical issues as a child, other than like the colds and the ear infections. The normal illnesses where you would get Tylenol or you would get a cold pack. I mean, we didn't even get an ice pack or a heat pad or anything like that. So you would instead get a blanket and you maybe get something to eat, and you would sit on the couch and you would play Christian Science hymns on the tape, or you would listen to Christian Science lectures, which were the closest thing to like a sermon about a topic related to Christian Science. We had lectures, and there would be teachers who were certified and had gone to extra Christian Science school to be certified. They would come around and do like a lecturing circuit. And so we would listen to these tapes, and we would, have additional indoctrination type things to listen to as we were either reading Science and Health. We also had what's called a Christian Science practitioner. That person went through some sort of training, practitioner training for a few weeks, and they were like kind of like an on-call life coach for Christian Scientists, where they're coaching you through and praying for you, although prayer is a little bit different, and maybe I should back up to that. Prayer is not intercessory prayer. Christians use intercessory prayer where they are talking to God on behalf of you and your problems. They are saying, Lord, please help Helen with her cancer treatment. I come before, this petitioning and talking directly to God, and like bringing someone into those words into your heart as you're like praying to God about them. So it's not prayer like that. It's actually focusing your mind on principles. And God is redefined not as a person, the person of Jesus Christ in the flesh, or the Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. No, God is life, truth, intelligence, substance. God has 7 synonyms in Christian Science, and these synonyms are another word for God, like intelligence. And you're thinking, how is just like a random word like intelligence now God? So you would be praying these principles, and again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it's hard to like convey that to someone listening that has no concept of this. But you're sick, and you're trying to align your mind internally, possibly through the help of someone over the phone who is also trying to align their thoughts that you are not sick, and that your body is not diseased, and that you are actually perfect, and that you are whole. And that is sort of the essence of like what it looked like to be sick in Christian Science. There are also Christian Science nurses, and they're not normal nurses. They're like, they don't even have basic first aid training, but they're called a Christian Science nurse. And it's like someone who feels called to just be praying or aligning their thoughts for someone, but also maybe cleaning a wound and putting a Band-Aid on it, or turning that person, or maybe giving them a little bath or something like that, but not any kind of like actual medical care. There are also nursing facilities that are approved to be nursing facilities like by the state in each of the states that they are. And there's no medical treatment given. There's no IVs, there's no fluids, there's no injections. So people go there when their symptoms get so bad that a family member can't take care of them anymore, and then they go in there basically to die, or to be, lightly nursed by someone. Often these people are like severely dehydrated, or they have a gaping wound that hasn't been attended to, or they have a cancerous something or other that's eating away at their, I mean, it runs the gamut. Or they're super elderly, like my grandmother made it to her mid 90s and then had a stroke, and then went into the Christian Science nursing facility, and then passed away of just days or a week maybe, because she was right at the end. So, you grow up seeing people struggle with things around you that you can't talk about and that you can't mention. I remember seeing a family member with like a large growth, probably some kind of prostate issue, like a large prostate growth, like in his pants. And I noticed that, and it's alarming. You aren't really allowed to ask questions, or if you do, you're sort of shut down, like, oh, what do you mean? He's fine. Everything's great, Or I had a friend. So I attended Sunday school all through my years up till I was 20. I was in college, and then I served on the board of my local church. I was a local church member, and most of us became mother church members at the age of 12, which just meant you sent away and said, I'm a member, and they send you a card. And um, I don't remember what else, if there was anything to do. It was very minimal. But so I kind of dove in myself, and I was the secretary for my local church at like 20 something. I think I was out of college by that time. So I sat at the board meetings and took minutes uh, and was involved there. I I never really considered doing the extra training. Like, it didn't appeal to me exactly to do class taught, is what that's called, where you go away and do 2 weeks of study, and then you go back one weekend a year and do like a little intensive. That didn't appeal to me for whatever reason. I had already been kind of asking questions in my early 20s, and even though I was super involved with my church, like, I still had these lingering questions. I had some physical issues that weren't being handled in Christian Science very well. Like, so what that means is I was sick, and I wasn't getting relief through Christian Science. So had a few things that were lingering, and then um, my husband, who at the time was my boyfriend, his mother was a nurse, an ICU nurse. And we had been dating since we were 17, and he was not raised in a church going household, but definitely Christian values. And he had become a Christian through his basketball coach at high school, but hadn't started going to church. But he knew enough that he was like, this Christian Science stuff is weird. Also, his best guy friend he went to Sunday school with me, so here are the two closest people in his life he kind of watched go through issues with Christian Science. So he started saying things to me after, I don't know what point it was, but he was like, why isn't the Bible enough? Like, why do you have to have this other book to explain the Bible? So Christian Scientists value the Science and Health book that Mary Baker Eddy wrote over the Bible. And it's actually in the church services in that manual I was talking about, where you can't change anything. The first reader reads, there's two readers up on a platform like a pulpit, but it's big enough for two people. Two readers. The first reader reads the Science and Health, her book. The second reader reads the Bible. So every week there is a lesson sermon that is put together by the Christian Science Publishing Society, and this is little sections of text. And so you read a section of text from the Bible, and then it's explained by the Science and Health. So you do read the Bible first, but the first reader is the one that reads the Science and Health after the Bible, so that it's explained by Mary Baker Eddy. That sounds complicated, doesn't it? So no pastor, no interesting sermon, just every Sunday you're reading the same thing Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday you go and two people read it live. There's a hymn, there's a solo, there's the reading of the lesson sermon, and like the Lord's Prayer. But there's a spiritual interpretation of the Lord's Prayer that Mary Baker Eddy wrote. So you read a verse of the Lord's Prayer and then her interpretation, and then a verse of the Lord's Prayer and then her interpretation. So everything is like kissed with the MBE, the Mary Baker Eddy, redefinition, which is interesting, right?
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on Christian Science. The second and final part will explore life after Christian Science and Lauren's recent publication. To find out more about Lauren's work, you can follow the links in the episode description. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.